Lesson 7, The American Revolution, Section 3, Great Britain Almost Wins the War. Great Britain almost wins the war. After the British abandoned Boston in the spring of 1776, Germain came up with his first plan for winning the war. He planned on using the British forces in America, led by General William Howe, to capture New York City. From that base, Germain hoped to win the war by moving the British troops north to destroy the rebellion at its heart, Massachusetts. To block the British invasion, Washington hurried with his army from Boston to New York. It was there that he heard the good news. By signing the Declaration of Independence, Congress had finally declared the colonies to be free and independent states. Washington had the Declaration of Independence read aloud to his troops. The time had come, he said, to show our enemies and the whole world that free men, contending for their own land, are superior to any mercenaries on earth. The Declaration made it clear that the troops had the support of all the colonies, who agreed that independence was a prize worth fighting for. African Americans in the war. For African Americans, however, the Declaration of Independence raised both hopes and questions. Did Jefferson's words, "all men are created equal," apply to them? Would independence bring an end to slavery? Should they join the Revolution? Even before independence was declared, a number of African Americans had joined the Patriot cause. Black militiamen, both free and slave, fought at Lexington, Concord, and Bunker Hill. Early in the war, however, blacks were banned from the Continental Army because Washington did not want the army to become a haven for runaway slaves. In contrast, the British promised freedom to all slaves who took up arms for the king, which resulted in thousands of runaways becoming loyalists and fighting for Great Britain. A shortage of volunteers soon forced Washington to change his mind. By 1779, about 15% of the soldiers in the Continental Army were African Americans, and large numbers of black sailors also served in the Continental Navy. As black Americans joined the war effort, some whites began to question their own beliefs. How could they accept slavery if they truly believed that all people are created equal, with the same rights to life, liberty, and happiness? By the war's end, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Pennsylvania had all taken steps to end slavery. Defeat in New York. On August 27, 1776, the American and British armies met in Brooklyn, New York for what promised to be a decisive battle. The Americans began their defense of the city in high spirits, but the inexperienced Americans were no match for the British, who had greater numbers and superior training. In 2 days of fighting, the British lost only 377 men, while the Americans lost 1,407. Satisfied that the war was nearly won, Howe ordered a halt to the British attack. Washington, he assumed, would do what any self-respecting European general would do in a hopeless situation, so Howe waited for Washington's honorable surrender. Washington had no intention of giving up, but he knew that his army would have to retreat in order to survive. Even though Washington knew this, he could not bring himself to utter the word retreat. An officer named Thomas Mifflin rescued him from his pride. "What is your strength?" Mifflin asked. 9,000, Washington replied. "It is not sufficient," said Mifflin bluntly. "We must retreat." Fading hopes. The battle for New York City was the first of many defeats for the Americans. In the weeks that followed, British forces chased the Americans out of New York, through New Jersey, and finally across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. For Joseph Martin and his comrades, this was a trying time. With little food to eat, the soldiers grew weak from hunger. As the weather turned cold, muddy roads and icy streams also added to their misery. With their terms of enlistment nearly up, many soldiers headed for home, but not before spreading the word that anyone who volunteered to risk his life in the Continental Army had to be crazy. By the time Washington reached Pennsylvania, only a few thousand men were still under his command, and many of his remaining troops, he reported, were entirely naked and most so thinly clothed as to be unfit for service. More troops had to be found, and found quickly, he wrote his brother. Otherwise, I think the game will be pretty well up.